Welcome to EDPAK 0022. This is a senior level intel, which is to upgrade the senior member upon asset creation and the organization's education methodology. This EDPAK is a flow-on from EDPAK 0021. The organization's directive is to create strategies for the reduction of alcohol-related violence within the hospitality industry. This strategy comprises of introducing a community policing model operating within the nighttime industry. This model is called the predator-free bars model. When this model operates as designed, its output is the increased safety of that community. For this model to operate as designed, the organization concentrates its resources towards the development of senior security within a target area. This development is using higher-level learning to upgrade these senior security personnel. This is what we call creating the asset. This EDPAK is to show our senior members how through human resource development we can create the asset. The EDPAK is broken into two sections, A and B. Section A comprises of the primary objectives of the education of the asset, how we created the materials needed for the upgrade, and why the organization built its very own education methodology. Section B upgrades upon how the materials are taught and who the HR division states should teach these materials, and shows the output of the predator-free bars model when operated by these assets. In creating the asset, the education must create a higher grade of security and have that grade maintained. To accomplish this, the organization sets down four primary objectives. The first is to create and maintain a standard of knowledge for the worker. Secondly, the education must be able to have the worker provide to the industry a duty of care. The third primary is to teach tactical responses to critical and dangerous events. And lastly, the education must be able to have the worker create and maintain working relationships with those engaged within the model. How we accomplish those primary objectives is through human resource development. To take a member of the community and transform them into a bouncer, to educate, prepare and ultimately create that level of output to be the asset, we have had to design solutions into the education methodology. Under human resource development, we start by placing the occupation, the environment and the worker themselves into research, assessment and testing. In making the senior bouncer the vital human resource, you must listen to that resource and use senior bouncer's feedback in the design of the materials to be taught. Over the period of 2 years, the output of our research enabled us to answer the two main questions for educating senior bouncers to become the asset. The first of these answers was the materials to be taught. In creating these materials for the asset, the organization brought hundreds of senior bouncers whom had backgrounds in either security and law enforcement, or education-related fields. These senior members assisted in the creation of the materials. Now that we have the materials for the asset, we have to take into consideration the 3 points of upgrade. These are, how we deploy and transfer the materials to the worker, how we assess the worker's retention of what was taught, and how we can assess the worker using what was taught while in operation. This brings us to how we teach the materials, how the worker learns these materials taught, and how we assess if the worker is capable of upgrade. To answer these questions, we would be able to find the best way in which to build the asset. In finding the best way in which to teach the materials, the organization researched over 40 countries in looking at the types of training that was offered or provided by governments, councils and private companies and institutions. What our research found was that in 85% of countries the standard training methods were the same. These were open book and classroom settings. When we look at the types of materials that we have for the upgrade, we find that the standard education methodology used in 85% of those countries was incapable of transferring and assessment of the material. What is an education methodology? Is a particular way in which you teach a person what is needed to be learned. A certain type of teaching designed to teach a particular type of role to reach the output needed. Under the security occupations and education methodology is to create a way in which to educate a person to be prepared for the hazards of their occupation. In designing an education methodology for roles in security-related fields, you must take into consideration the levels of danger that an occupation can have, and in doing so be able to classify an occupation by these dangers that a person must manage. Under human resource development, when classifying an occupation as specialized, you must analyze the element of danger relative to the occupation and that danger's relationship to the role. Within the security industry, on whether it reaches the level of a specialized occupation, danger is the common denominator. The occupation is assessed upon the relativity of danger that undertaking the role within the occupation, imminence of danger towards the role itself, the frequency of that danger appearing within the occupation, reduction of danger if corrective action is taken, seriousness of the outcome of an event if incorrect actions are taken, the relationship of the role towards the reduction of danger within the environment, the seriousness of the danger towards the role and others affected by the danger. What is an absolute is that if an occupation reaches the level of a specialized occupation, under human resource development must have their own specific education methodology. An example of a specialized occupation in the security industry would be the police. The police have created an education methodology to be able to create a police officer. The method of educating must be the most efficient way in doing so, and every police officer must graduate from that education. Another example of a specialized occupation is the military. The military have created many different education methodologies for many different roles that the military has, but every single member of every country's military must pass their basic training. When the military designs their methods of educating, they create their soldiers under the teach, learn, assess theory in preparing them for managing the dangers within their roles. Our organization classes the occupation bouncer as a specialized occupation. We do this by breaking down the occupation and the role in managing danger when it becomes present when in operation as a bouncer. When we do this, we find that the bouncer is the first responder to all emergency events. These events range from fire evacuations, to stabbings and sexual assaults. We see the physical danger that a bouncer must place themselves in managing an event. We see that the bouncer is a primary eyewitness to many criminal events. Looking at job characteristics of the role, we see the enforcement of multiple pieces of their country's legislation, many in relation to their country or state's liquor acts. The role entails the direct management of safety of the public, the identification of violent and sexual predators. The role has a responsibility for assisting local law enforcement when in the actions of their duties. Taking these into consideration for a specialized occupation, you must have a specific way in which to prepare a person for the role and the danger that the role entails. When classifying the occupation and whether we need to design an education methodology and what type of methodology, we again must look at the totality of events that a bouncer will come into contact with, the seriousness of each of these events and the dangers that they pose upon the bouncer. In classifying the occupation, we must also take into account the danger of not having the bouncer react or engage to stop a violent or sexual event, and the seriousness of injury or harm that may happen to a victim or victims if a bouncer does not engage or is not trained in responding correctly. The education methodology that has been created recognizes these dangers and in its design must prepare the worker mentally to respond, by operating within the event, managing the event and taking control of violent and life-threatening events. Under the model, the education is to reduce these threats to a minimum. The only way in which to do so is for the education methodology to produce the asset. It is through reaching the primary objectives needed for the organization's community policing models that have been designed for the specific output for reduction of alcohol-related harm within the community. That the only way possible is to recognize the occupation bouncing as a specialized occupation. To recognize that the most vital asset for operations of the models was the bouncer. And the only way to properly prepare the asset for managing the danger within the occupation was to create an education methodology specifically designed for that role. The organization adds one more element to our model's methodology by introducing learn, teach, assess, learn. In the past, the governments and companies in creating safer environments with the main objective of reducing alcohol-related harm failed. and they failed because of their focus was upon just training the security to be safer. We find that you cannot just teach security to be safer. The standard way focuses upon the micro, and that micro being the focus upon the worker. This is where the failure to create safer environments comes from. B.R.A.W.L treats the occupation as a specialized occupation, and by doing so, integrates the occupation, the worker and the environment. By doing this and only by doing this, can we create a model that will fit into the environment that will protect, and to manage and enforce this protection, we must create an asset which can operate these models. To not fail in creating safer environments for the global hospitality industry. To not fail in the goal of reducing alcohol-related violence and sexual assaults. The senior bouncer is the most needed resource within the global hospitality industry. This is why the education methodology is so valuable to creating these models of protection for the community. EDPAK 0022B covers the decision-making processes and how we arrived at the methods of teaching the materials. And who from the industry should teach this knowledge and materials to the worker. Answering these last two questions gives us our education methodology and our way of producing an asset which is capable of maintaining the primary objectives needed for the operations of the predator-free bars model. This brings us to the end of EDPAK 0022A. Please use this EDPAK for your upgrades and senior assignments. Any questions upon the materials of the EDPAK, please contact B.R.A.W.L's Human Resource Division.